I'm sure that you will, if you don't already after tonight's meeting, admire and appreciate what they're doing as much as I do. It's really a phenomenal idea. We have great leadership in place, and among the most prominent of those leaders is Barbara Ketchum. But before turning the meeting over to Barbara, I want to also recognize my fellow hosts tonight, who are Gina and John Donahue, Natalie and Mark Rosenberg, Susan and John Caven, and Susan and Bruce Smathers, Joan and myself. So thank you all for being with us. And Barbara, will you take it away?
Thanks. Thank you, Preston, so much. And thank you to all of the hosts. But I want to particularly thank Natalie Rosenberg, whose idea this was. She conceived it, and she has led our way to this way, maybe 100 people tuning in. All I want to do is give you a tiny bit of history before Nancy Powell, one of our team members who's fabulous, is going to tell you what Riverfront Parks Now is all about. I also want to add my welcome to, I think, Senator Audrey Gibson has joined us. She's a good supporter along with so many people in this community. I can't even begin to go there, but I want to take just 2 seconds to give you a little background on who we are. It's a true citizens initiative that's grown out of the members of various nonprofit groups who've all focused in some way on our downtown riverfront in the recent past. 4 of these nonprofits in particular have really informed our mission, which Nancy will tell you more about. But the first one I want to mention is the Late Bloomers Garden Club Civic Committee, which about 6 or 7 years ago began talking to 40 or 50 community leaders about greening and designing a corridor from City Hall to the river, and then developing a cohesive, comprehensive plan for our waterfront. That's instead of the silo development that has been so common in Jacksonville when someone comes along and wants to develop a piece, get a vision for the whole waterfront. And about the same time, Late Bloomers Civic Group was working that some architects from the AIA were also working on a vision for the waterfront. You may have seen it in the issues of Arbus magazine, that they designed nodes of interest on the downtown riverfront, a beautiful plan. And then, of course, Irma came along, and the focus became what flood mitigation and resilience planning. And as always, St. John's Riverkeeper led that effort with a lot of community forums, and continues to. So these forces all came together at about the same time that Scenic Jacksonville, which had always been focused on visual enhancement in Jacksonville and making more out of the beauty that we have here, merged with City Beautiful Jacksonville. They had that wonderful luncheon last year with Mayor Riley from Charleston. And Scenic Jacksonville, those combined boards of those 2 organizations fully understood the opportunity that we have right now to make our largely city-owned and vacant downtown waterfront into a vibrant, popular, resilient, and economically successful district built for the needs of the 21st century. It's just that moment in our history where it can happen. So 7 of us came together earlier this year from these diverse organizations, called on Laurie Boyer and started talking about, can we present this vision to the community? Can we make a comprehensive plan? And we have since then, oh gosh, I guess we've met with 40 or 50 individuals, community leaders, dozens of them, city councilmen, 3 former mayors, probably 25 civic groups, We've all been working to get the word out that this is the moment when we can make a difference. We have 8 organizations that have been wonderful in supporting us, and I want to give them credit and tell you who they are. There's the Garden Club of Jacksonville, and by the way, Denise and Damien, thank you so much for your wonderful expertise in everything, but especially in helping us with this Zoom meeting. There's Greenscape of Jacksonville, the Urban League, Memorial Park Association, the Late Bloomers Garden Club, St. John's Riverkeeper, the Sierra Club, and Scenic Jacksonville, to whom we owe a great debt because their executive director, Nancy Powell, has been our executive director too, I think it's safe to say. So Nancy and I are part of that group of 7, and I want to introduce to you the other 5 before I turn it over to Nancy to show you what the program is. Besides Nancy and me, there is Susan Caven, who is president of Scenic Jacksonville and has been so important to this whole process. There's Michael Kerwin, who is actually vice president of the board of Scenic Jacksonville, and also an attorney. It is Foley and Lardner, isn't it, Michael? Ted Pappas, who of course is the dean of the AIA here in the community. And the last one, but not the least, is Barbara Goodman, who was superintendent of the Timaquan Parks, whole Timaquan Parks, and a long-term national park person who has been invaluable to us. So that's our group of 7 and our group of 8 groups, and we want to engage each and every one of you, and thank you again for being here. I think I'm supposed to say cheers and sip and see. Now, Nancy Powell, take it away, if you will, please.
Okay, thanks. I think what I want to make sure that everybody knows that Jimmy Orth and Jimmy is part of the organization, the steering committee also. He and I are going to tag team this presentation. We've done it a number of times. And I think also if you all have questions during the presentation, we are going to have a Q&A at the end. Type them in the chat and throughout the program, and then we're going to stop and Damien's going to facilitate a Q&A at the end. So, but feel free to make comments or questions in the chat program. And then, so we'll just get started. So, Riverfront Parks Now. Great cities have great parks, and this is a picture, of course, of Memorial Park, which is part of our coalition and is really the only designed riverfront park we have in the downtown or near the downtown area. It's not really, it's kind of near downtown. This is where we started. We found a picture from the Downtown Investment Authority, and we recreated it with all of the publicly owned properties on our riverfront. And what's really happened is, you know, this was about a year ago at this time, the landing was taken down and replaced with a grassy area. Just earlier than that, the courthouse had been taken down. And during the past 6 months, the Shipyards property, which is the number 6 property here in the pink, the development rights to that had expired. So within the past year, all of this property became really unencumbered and city owned. So as opposed to the rest of the county, in the rest of the county, the St. Johns River is about 90% privately owned, but in the downtown area, especially on the North Bank, about 50% of it is city owned. So we saw this as a opportunity to recreate our downtown. So we see it as a once in a lifetime opportunity. The picture you're seeing here is a picture from a drone of the shipyard's property as it stands today. You can see the Hart Bridge is down on the right-hand side. And within that whole property that we just looked at, we envision a connected network of active parks and extensive green space to include a signature park along the downtown riverfront. That's the overall vision. And as Barbara said, we are looking at a holistic view of our riverfront. The benefits to this is really, it's really these multiple benefits that really struck us, because to provide a gathering place for the community. The picture you're looking at right now is the existing Metropolitan Park. And as you can see, there's these mature trees, there's a marina. It was a gathering space. It's been neglected for the past 10 years. But the benefits are really social health and wellness. Now with COVID in the last year, it's even more important. But in addition to that, we look at stimulating the economic development and creating a more resilient riverfront. Resiliency cannot be understated. And this is the difference between where we are today and where we were maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Nobody was thinking about it at that time, but we are now. And so what we did is we looked at cities across the US as to what they were doing with their downtown riverfronts, you know, starting with thinking about resiliency, but also as it relates to the other goals of community gathering and recreation and health and wellness and economic development. And I'm from Chicago, so we couldn't help but look at Grant Park in Chicago. This is the front lawn of a connected series of civic spaces. And you know what's interesting about Chicago is that this is a constant state of renewal and change. When I was growing up in high school, Grant Park was not what it is today. If you've been there recently, it's fabulous. They have the Pritzker Pavilion where the orchestra plays. There's Millennial Park. There's Maggie Daley Park over here on the right-hand side, up at the right. And all of this is connected to 18 miles of lakefront trails, beaches and parks, as well as the Chicago Riverwalk. But what you see in this picture is the economic impact of such a front lawn. All of these buildings, this is among the most valuable real estate in Chicago, because they not only have a lakefront view, but they have this park in front of them, which is a magnificent public space, and it's all connected. And this is all being continued with, they have an expansion south of here of Northerly Island. This is connected to the museum campus, to Soldier Field. You can walk without ever crossing, you know, a major street to these events. And in the past 10 years, the Chicago Riverwalk has been built, and that is also connected. It's been a phenomenal success, and it's been built in phases. This is another thing we see, is a lot of these civic spaces are not built all at once, but they're planned, and then they're built in phases. So the Riverwalk, what you're looking at here is it's called the jetty section. So they're floating wetlands, and it's a place where you can learn about the river. But each block has its own theme, and there are blocks with restaurants and outdoor eating places. There are places where you can see where you can rent a kayak and other things. So Chicago is a great model, but we also realized that, you know, we're not Chicago. And so we looked at some mid-sized cities. The Ralph C. Wilson Centennial Park in Detroit is 22 acres. It's a $50 million renovation of an existing park, and they expect 3 million visitors annually. This is designed by Van Valkenburg Associates, which is one of the premier park, you know, urban park designers. And it's one of many transformational projects along Detroit's riverfront. This one in particular, Ralph C. Wilson donated $100 million, $50 million for here and $50 million for Buffalo, New York. And he was of course, the Buffalo Bills owner. So his estate has donated this. And what we see, this is an unusual one where it's mostly privately funded. Most of them are public and private, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. In Louisville, Louisville is a great example. They have an 85-acre park. Um, they have found that it's been so successful that they're adding 22 more acres. And that's another thing we found, is that these public spaces are in demand. Another view of this same park is this as a gathering space. And you can see the similarities here with this, Hart Bridge-like highway that kind of separates the downtown, but it's still a very successful. You can go underneath it. You can walk underneath that to get to the downtown area. And the Yum Center is, a basketball arena. So across the river from this is Indiana. They are building a 300-acre park and integrating it with a regional impact. They see it as a destination and a way to connect both sides of this river. And in Memphis, Tennessee, my husband's from Memphis, and so he's very familiar with this. They have dedicated, this is breaking ground this fall. It's a 30-acre park designed in 4 distinct zones. And so, they have a place for everything. And in Memphis's case, they wanted to be here closer to the downtown. Memphis has Mud Island, for those of you who know Memphis, which is in the river of the Mississippi River, but they wanted this park to be closer to the downtown and connecting. And that's another theme, is connecting it to other parts of the cities. And so there's this interaction between the two. But this has they needed a space for Memphis in May. And so they really went to the community and asked the community what they wanted in this park. And so it's an iterative process. And that's really an important part of what we see is the community engagement piece of this for Jacksonville. Brooklyn Bridge Park, this is New York City, but we saw the piers at the shipyards in a similar way. And so this is a wonderful adaptation of shipping piers. And each of these piers has a different theme. Some of them have, ball fields, and some of them have trails and other things. And what's interesting about this is 85 acres in total. And you can see the linear park along the highway, but the development on the right-hand side was planned at the same time, and this development pays for 90% of the park's budget, but it's only on 10% of the land. So, when people say we want parks and development, it's not an either or. It can be integrated if it's planned properly. And so that's really what we see as an important piece. And other cities have done that. In fact, Cincinnati's another example here. This is the Smale Riverfront Park. It's 32 acres. It's a very creative park. I've been here. They have just an amazing set of amenities. And the next slide shows that the similarities with Jacksonville. It doesn't have just one stadium, but 2 stadiums. And so the park here is on the riverside of the road that goes through here. And then there's this major development called the banks that are in between the 2 stadiums. So there are development fees that help pay for the maintenance of this park. And again, it's a very successful park. And this is an example. This is the same park, and it's just an example of how they've done their Riverwalk part of this park. And I'm going to turn it over to Jimmy, who's going to talk about some of the parks as it relates to resiliency.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Nancy. I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight with you. Yeah, I think what hopefully you've seen so far, and what we were really struck by when we were doing our research into other parks across the country, is there are all these co-benefits that we have to take into consideration when we're developing parks. When parks were originally developed, we kind of looked at them just primarily as a source of recreation for the community. But now we know that they can actually be catalysts for economic development. They can improve health and wellness in the community and provide access, of course, to our waterways. But what we're also seeing across the country is that cities are looking to parks and green spaces to help make their cities more resilient. In New York, a perfect example, after Hurricane Sandy, they realize just how vulnerable they are to sea level rise and storm surge. And so this is just one of many parks throughout New York City that are either have been built or are planned that are going to help provide a buffer for that storm surge and the sea level rise. This was actually an old industrial site. They removed the bulkheads. They recreated a wetland, which was originally there because this was a floodplain. And that helps to store storm water and to help prevent flooding in adjacent areas. And they also put in a bioswale and some other features that can help this help the area around this become more resilient. One of the cities also that's really taken this to the next level is Boston. They too recognized how vulnerable they are to sea level rise, just as we are, obviously a low-lying community in Jacksonville. And they have an extensive plan, the Resilient Boston Harbor Plan, where they're looking at natural spaces throughout the entire community. And it's a plan to redesign waterfront parks, to restore marshes, even retreat from the shoreline in some cases to create flood protection and improve access and recreation. And they're doing this throughout the city. As you can see, all these yellow areas are natural areas that are either exist and that they are trying to retrofit to create more resilient communities, or they have enhanced or created. This is another example that's great. I went here a few years ago and I had absolutely no idea. It's a great park. I had no idea that I was standing on top of this cistern underground that's capturing 1 million gallons of stormwater a year. And this is another example of something that communities are doing where they're incorporating resiliency strategies. So if there's flooding problems or there's water quality problems, they need to capture that stormwater and treat it before it goes out to the river. They're doing that here at this park in Nashville. I think what's also great about that particular park is that within the just 2 blocks of this park and the adjacent park that's right behind the stadium in Nashville, they've actually seen $1 billion in private investment within just those 2 blocks of those park boundaries. So what we've seen too, that's really, I mean, I think that struck me the most, I was surprised, is the return on investment in terms of how parks can be an economic catalyst. It's really surprising what an incredible tool they can be for communities to revitalize their downtowns and urban areas. This is another example. I love Chattanooga. This is the poster child, I think, of cities that have actually looked to public spaces in parks along the riverfront to revitalize their town. They've been doing it for an awful long time. It was well over 20, I think it was 30 years ago, they engaged in a public community-wide process to develop a vision and a plan for their riverfront. Now, one thing I like about Chattanooga is, one, it's a small community, but two, what really is interesting is back in the 60s and early 70s, it was actually one of the most polluted cities in the country. Their air quality was one of the worst in the country. And also, of course, they were seeing significant economic decline. And so they realized, we have this wonderful riverfront, this wonderful river, and let's create these beautiful spaces along the waterfront, connect them. There's a pedestrian bridge that goes across and connects both banks. And they have this great trails system and riverwalk system that goes along both banks and that connects with other parks. And this park in particular, this is a newer park where they've actually incorporated resiliency strategies into this park. It was formerly a brownfield. They went in, cleaned it up, and you'll see in the next slide, they recreated these wetlands. You can see them down there with those little weirs, that they created a system where stormwater from the surrounding commercial development flows into that wetland system, and then it's treated before it goes out to the water. So it improves water quality, but also this park was designed to withstand a 100-year flood. So it's also helping to retain floodwaters and stormwaters and prevent flooding in adjacent areas. This is actually a really interesting part, because this is, I think it's about 160 acres actually total along Buffalo Bayou, along this, which was actually once just essentially a drainage ditch. And they recognized that there was an opportunity here to re-establish this as a more natural waterway And in the process, they have gone in and helped to put in features to help allow this to flood naturally when there are flooding incidents, but that they could also create recreational opportunities. So there's all these great trails that go along Buffalo Bayou, and this park here in particular. And you can see that it was designed to flood. In this next slide, you'll see what happens during a flood event. This was anticipated. They anticipate that these type of events are going to happen on a regular basis. But what's the benefit here is it's helping to hold those floodwaters so it does not flood the adjacent commercial and residential areas. And then when these waters recede, the idea, and you can see in the previous slide, is that it goes back to being a community asset that can be used for recreation. All of these features here, including this building, are designed to flood. They can go in afterwards, clean it up, and then it goes back to being a park. And then we saw also another park that we actually talked about earlier, is Smale Park. We saw what a great park it is. It has the adjacent development that's helping to support it. It has the recreational areas with the 2 ball fields. But then this park as well they anticipated in the design of this park that it would flood. It's in a floodplain along the Mississippi River, and they know it's going to flood eventually. So they anticipated that and put in features so that infrastructure can be removed and moved up to a higher ground in some cases. But then when those floodwaters recede, it goes back to being I would say, one of the best parks we have in our country right now. It's a really neat park.
Okay, so am I here? Okay, can you hear me? So we're going to just come back to Florida for the couple of the cities, including Tampa and St. Pete. So this is Curtis Hickson Waterfront Park. It's actually an older park in Tampa. It's very similar to our Landing in the sense that it's near their Performing Arts Center and it's along the Riverwalk. And it's a 8-acre park that attracts, they have lots of events and they attract over 1 million people annually to this park. The Tampa Riverwalk is 2.4 miles, and they've extended theirs down to industrial areas that have been redeveloped since they put in the Riverwalk, and they've actually just gotten a Department of Transportation grant to go 22 more miles of the Riverwalk. And across the river from that park is a newly renovated Julian B. Lane Riverfront Park. And this park is 25 acres. It opened in 2018. And the community gathering process, the idea generating of the interaction with the community, this community wanted a very active park. And so what's in this park, you can't quite see it in this picture, but they have ball fields, they have tennis courts. What you're looking at here on the riverfront is a gathering area for events, as well as a performance boathouse. So they have crew events and paddleboarding, and this little cove here is a place where people can learn how to be on the river without being in the river. You can see the sloped roof of the boathouse, which has rainwater drainage built into it. And that boathouse is a very popular place for events and weddings, and they rent it out so that they get a source of revenue through this. So it's a very, it's had award-winning design, and it's been very popular. And again, it's one of many riverfront parks. They also have Armature Works and Waterworks. Armature Works is a private entity, but it's a public, it's a public food hall and an area. So Tampa is really moving. And St. Petersburg Pier. So this was just recently opened. I was able to visit. My daughter lives in the St. Pete, Tampa area, and I visited this. It opened in July. This is the third iteration of this pier. It's been around for 100 years, but it's actually a pier district. It's 26 acres, so it's more like a pier park. And while it has a $92 million investment, they estimate a $80 million annual impact. It's a very popular place. And what impressed us about St. Petersburg is that this is one of 6 The Pier District is one of 6 waterfront districts in St. Petersburg, and they have a master plan that was published. It's on the website. You can go look at it. That was published in 2015, and they are following the plan. And most of different districts have different amounts of green space versus development, but it's a very impressive, and most of this was actually publicly funded. They have it, which is more unusual. In most of the parks are private and public. Here's another view of some resiliency areas and native landscapings within the pier. There's also a beach. It's got a lot to it, and 7 restaurants in this pier. So when we talk about parks and active parks, we don't mean that they don't have to have, rich amenities that include places to eat. Here's a piece of artwork. This was privately funded, the artwork, Janet Eichelman, and it's a very experiential. It's hard to tell in pictures, but when you're underneath this piece of art, it is just really interesting, both from a daytime perspective and a nighttime perspective. And we didn't go into other parks, but there are many other cities, and I'm sure all of you have traveled to other cities, but these are mid-sized cities that are investing in major urban waterfront parks, and all of them have really interesting and the same benefits that we have here. So coming back to Jacksonville, the Emerald Trail is in the works, and it's breaking ground. We just heard from Christina Nelson, the board chair, earlier today. They're breaking ground in the first quarter. It's a really exciting project. I know some of you all are involved with it, and we are in full support of this effort. We feel that it will bring people downtown through these trails. It will allow the mobility to enjoy the downtown area, and we see an opportunity when we have the park to have bike rentals and places where you can hop on the trail from the park, or you can be in the trails and get to the park. So it's going to amplify many of the downtown initiatives, and be able to cross the river and connect the South Bank and the North Bank. Another area which Barbara mentioned was the AIA waterfront activation nodes. This is a sketch from Arbus that they did in 2017. So the idea here is that within a 5-minute walk, there would be something to do and something interesting to see, whether it's pieces of art, whether it's something interesting culturally wise. And we see this also as very complementary to this idea of planning the riverfront in a holistic way. So the opportunity, we are focusing a little bit more on the North Bank, because that's where most of the publicly available land is. And this is, again, one of the opportunity areas. It's not the only one. But here's an example of what it can be transformed as. Just one example. We haven't gone into the park design phase yet, because we're not quite there yet. But I just want to speak really quickly about funding sources. So as I mentioned earlier, most of these funds are public sources and private sources, but it doesn't fall on any one area. So as you can see, there's many sources of public funding. A lot of these, and especially with resiliency and environmental cleanup, there's grants available. Sometimes the Houston project is within a tax increment district, which helps fund that park. And park operations also are sources of fundings, as well as on the private side, developer fees, corporate support, and private philanthropy. From a maintenance standpoint, there's a lot of them have conservancy models where a nonprofit partnership kind of works with the city, similar to the Memorial Park Association, where they have a relationship with the Parks Department to help support maintenance, operations, and upkeep. And we know that's not our, it hasn't been our strength in our parks. And so we see this as an important piece of the puzzle. But as far as the benefits go, you know, in our sister cities, there's a document on our website that talks about economics in other cities. You know, there's a return of from 6 to 1 to 40 to 1, as far as $1 investment giving back $6 to $40 in economic impact. And again, there's not you know, one panacea, but we see this, for example, Mosh did a economic impact study, and we support, you know, museums and parks go together. So we support those kinds of cultural activities we think can really be beneficial together with like the Emerald Trail. So there's a lot of positive momentum happening, and we see this as an important part. And so back to the opportunity of, you know, the main benefits here: the gathering place for the community, for people of all kinds, people who don't have boats, people who are the millennials that are going to be moving here. Recreation, health, and wellness is going to be more and more important. A resilient riverfront, and the economic impact all of the above. So what it will take, you know, we are seeking a riverfront master plan. We've been we've been advocating with the DIA. We've started to talk more with the city council, and of course, they've been tied up a little bit with Lot J, but we really see that as an important piece, is to look holistically and not look in silos. We feel also that this needs to have public involvement to create a shared vision. We don't feel like it should be something that is, you know, cooked up by some, even us. We have different ideas of what we want, but we want to know what Jacksonville wants. What do people want to see on their riverfront? And so let's have that conversation. Prioritize the public access of the riverfront. We need leadership at all levels, and a commitment to excellence. You know, we want to make sure that whatever we do it right, we do it well. And support from the community is critical. This is a truly grassroots effort, and what's been really exciting is that, you know, people are excited, and our message is resonating with a lot of different groups, and we hear it. We finally hear the Downtown Investment Authority talking about parks, which they had never really done, you know, much of before. They thought of themselves mostly as, you know, just focusing on the development at hand, and now they're talking about both. So that's a real success. And then, you know, kind of what you can do is to help spread the word. Talk to people, talk to your council people. If you're excited about this, share with us groups that we can talk to so that we can continue to spread this word. You know, what the big message is: we want a holistic plan with public input. We want people to have a say in what happens there. Staying informed by getting on our newsletter mailing list and following us on social media. Riverfront Parks Now does not yet on social media, but you can follow Scenic Jacksonville and the Riverkeeper and the other organizations, and we will soon have a social media presence. Occasionally, you've already seen these. We have call to actions when we have to react to something that is happening. We ask people to write to their city council people or to the DIA or to whoever, and that has been very successful. People are doing it, and so when that happens, that is what our officials really pay attention to. And so so continue to participate in that. And then finally, we're gonna have some Q&A now, but if you have thoughts, you know, after this presentation, please send us your feedback and your ideas. And when we get to the community engagement process, which we hope to do in the first quarter of next year, you know, participate in that and encourage others to participate.
As you saw in the presentation, it benefits us from a health and wellness standpoint. The economic development benefits are huge. The Atlanta Beltline saw a 6-to-1 return on investment, whereas the Rose Kennedy Greenway in Boston, you had a 40-to-1 return on investment, and the increased property values were 49%. So we need to start looking at this as a way to stimulate growth. We don't just have to give out REV grants or give out bread box loans, we can actually use parks as a strategy that will attract jobs, will attract residents, and will increase adjacent property values and economic development. And we are going to have to, I just want to emphasize this, we are going to have to invest in resiliency strategies downtown. We saw how vulnerable we are during Irma. So there is going to be a required investment. You can actually do that in some cases more cost effectively if they're actually incorporated into parks using green spaces. So I think that, you know, that's the thing we've got to focus on, is the co-benefits and the holistic value that a lot of these parks provide to the community. It's really, the return on investment is much greater than some of these other other strategies that we've put in place to attract development and obviously we haven't been very successful at revitalizing downtown to this point.
All right, so this is a good time to answer some of the questions that came in. Nancy and also Jimmy, thank you so much for answering one of the questions. Sherry Leslie Pierpoint asked earlier if there had been a soil assessment done at the shipyards and if there was also any hazmat mitigation as well. And the answer was that yes, there has been a soil assessment and there was contamination, or there is contamination on the site, but there's been no plan put forth to outline to the things that are necessary to remediate those shipyards. Another question was asked, Nancy, was what public transportation access is there, or what's planned to actually propose those parks, the project in the public spaces as well?
Well, if you're looking at the shipyards and Metropolitan Park, the JTA has a major plan on Bay Street to do the urban circulator. Some of you might have heard of that. So I think that is their idea of, you know, of connecting the downtown and the convention center where the train station is, the Prime Osborne, all the way over to the stadium. That is one important piece. You know, we see the Riverwalk and as being a really important piece, because I personally feel like if we had done the Riverwalk all the way to Metropolitan Park initially, you know, it doesn't seem that far. If you're on a bicycle, it's not that far. You know, that is, I think the urban circulator is their thought on that. And also as it relates to development, you know, we see across Bay Street, we see Bay Street as very important. We would like to see Bay Street being really well planned from a boulevard standpoint with trees and narrowing and really make it a beautiful boulevard. And with the development on the other side of the street. So that's one reason why we conceptually, we're not opposed to Lot J being built. You know, funding aside, everybody has their own views on the funding piece of it, but that's where infill development, there's lots of opportunity for infill in core downtown as well as in the stadium district.
Thank you. Sherry McGill mentioned that there was obviously some discussion in the chat in reference to surveys. You had mentioned Tampa and Memphis, and that the city's group or your group is actually planning to conduct a survey. She's asking, how will we recreate that if Downtown Investment Authority seems to be involved with downtown vision?
How will we recreate
the survey?
Nancy, the question is, Downtown Investment Authority seems to own any visioning about downtown. So how do you influence the structure that we've built as a city to decide what the rest of us really want to see?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we've been the drumbeat is happening because we have been pushing this. I think there are some positive developments that are impending on that. But we're not going to wait because, you know, we don't know the timing of what's going to happen, you know. And so we're going to actually go ahead and create a process of understanding what people want to see in their riverfront and asking them. We see it as complementary. We don't think it's going to be something opposed to them. It's all information. And so, and things have changed in 5 years. The last time they did community input on the landing was in 2015. So so we see that as complementary, and we also, COVID is complicating any charrette kind of idea. We're doing our process ourselves from a steering committee standpoint, so that we can then help create a poll via UNF, and then also have community conversations. We talked with Audrey Gibson today about having some conversations with community groups in different parts of town, around closer to downtown, but in all the different economic areas. And we see this also as a social equity, benefit. And the East Side Coalition and the East Side developments, it's not that far from there. And so it gives people access to the river that, from all over town. And the Emerald Trail really goes through all of that part. So it's all complementary in that sense.
Thank you. Has there been any response from City Hall or City Council members and the Mayor's office? This is a question from Bill Hoff.
Well, we are meeting with City Council folks, and we're going to circle back with many of them. They have been a little bit distracted with the Lot J situation, so we have not wanted to. But as you maybe have heard, a lot of people are echoing this idea of a holistic view. Why are we looking at Lot J in isolation? Because that there's bigger, more things to come, and why don't we look at this together? Parking. So parking is a perfect example, right? If you're going to have mosh and you're going to have a park somewhere, we want to plan for parking, and we don't want parking on the riverfront. So how do we do that? And so that's part of the effort. All of those nuts and bolts. Ted Pappas always talks to us, the nuts and bolts of things have to be thought through, as far as the structure of things. But, so that's really where this holistic planning effort, the urban design firms do this. And so we're hoping that there's some possibilities that we have, that we are pursuing, or that we are aware of, that could help us in this arena. And that, so we hold out some hope that this can be done, really cohesively with the city. And, but we're going to keep pushing from a grassroots perspective, because that's really what this is. And what we've been told by many city leaders is, you need this wall of support. You need the community to keep doing this. And this is the first time, Mayor Payton told us, he said when he had a plan to revitalize Metropolitan Park, it was a great plan. And, a number of things happened, including the recession that kind of killed it. But he said at the time, they didn't have community groups like ours, really with this drumbeat of support. And so this is relatively new, and as far as the strength that they're seeing. And I think a lot of things are just coming together. I think that with Mosh raising money for their revitalization and the Emerald Trail happening, there's just a lot of excitement about the public and the civic spaces that we can all enjoy.
And let me say real quick too, to add on that is again, it kind of goes back to my comments at the end of the presentation, is that we really have the pushback we had a lot of positive reaction from city council members, I should say, but there is some reticence because of the fact that there's this mindset that we have to have private development generating tax revenue. And obviously that's important in a city that is so dependent upon tax revenue. But I think that's where we need to educate our leaders about the other benefits that these parks provide, the return on investment that has been proven in studies of other parks in other cities, and why so many other communities throughout the country are pursuing this strategy of trying to create public space along the riverfront and development that fills in behind that public space. And I think that it's a proven model that's been shown to work in other communities. And it's really, honestly, I wish we could have shown all the cities that we've researched, because some of these parks are fantastic that they're planning. And even in some really small cities, And so I think that's something that's part of it, is the education process, because we have this mindset it has to be private development, has to be generating tax revenue, which is, I think, kind of ironic actually, because we give so many tax breaks to private development where they're not paying that much in taxes, with rev grants where they actually get exempt from 75% of the taxes, or that we are actually owning facilities like Daly's Place that is not generating any tax revenue. So,
and I would just add that, we're looking 50 years out, I mean, it's going to be beyond, it's going to be for my grandchildren and, or my children. My son tells me, he says, Mom, I want this for my kids, so make it happen. But we're looking for the long view here, and that's including this resiliency component. We can't be short-sighted about what's going to happen to our riverfront. And it's not like we don't have plenty of space to develop within our downtown right now. That's that where the riverfront can be the front lawn, and we can have development.
and I think that, we've actually, one thing we've noticed, and sorry, Damon, I know there's probably lots of questions, but the one thing that I think is interesting is that long view. Is you look at the landing, I think that's what's so interesting to me, is it really didn't last 30 years. I mean, it was in serious decline well before we tore it down. So you have a 30-year investment, and there was a lot of public dollars that went into that investment, and we ended up tearing it down, and there's nothing there anymore to show for it. But an iconic park can provide benefits for the community for generations to come. I look at Memorial Park, and how many generations have benefited from that park and are going to continue to benefit from that park in the future. So I think that's another thing that's really critical that we get across, is that iconic parks can provide benefits for generations, as opposed to private development that typically has a much shorter lifespan.
Thank you. A couple more questions to follow up with the Lot J conversation. Lisa Williams asked if you guys know if a park is planned for Metropolitan Park land at all.
The question is the park, well, that's the question on the table.
Great last meal.
That's the question on the table right now. What we know is that Shad Khan wants Metropolitan Park for his, he wants to build a Four Season. He announced that about a month ago. We knew that beforehand. And he also wants parcels on either side of it's basically the old kids campus. So we know that that's what he wants, but he, the city owns the shipyards, and the park is a National Park Service. It's under a National Park Service grant. So it's not super easy to get out of that. The city is trying to get out of that. Some of you probably saw our call to action a couple of weeks ago, where we opposed the swap proposal that we saw so it gets a little complicated. I don't want to go into all of that. But our vision is that that the area is for a public benefit. And again, it doesn't mean that anything on the riverfront should be open to the public. So a museum is privately managed from a nonprofit, but it's open to the public. Anybody can go to a museum. A restaurant, anybody can go to a restaurant. So boat rentals and a marina, public marina. So really that's our vision. It does conflict with the Shad Khan vision. And so that is going to be probably taken up sometime in the next month or two, and we're going to be assessing what kind of what happens there, and pushing forth our vision of reserving the land for the public. But part of the question is, what do Jacksonville want? What does Jacksonville want? And if the polls come back, maybe people do want the Four Seasons on there. I don't know. We haven't asked the public. The public has not been asked what they want. And so that's part of this community engagement process. And if Mosh is there, where should it be? It shouldn't be just like identified in a particular area without thinking about what's around it. I know that they want to know what's around it. So we want this holistic view, and we know that this is possible because other cities have done it. And so, it does require a high level of design expertise and people with experience in urban parks and urban public spaces and urban development. So you want to be able to have that view. But what happens to Metropolitan Park? You know, we'd like to see it renovated and be a public asset, you know. And whether you do the shipyards first or, you know, Metropolitan Park right now is already, you don't have to mitigate it. It's got the bones. It's not, you know, it's not, you wouldn't build it today the way we built it before. So you would really want to redesign it. But it's got some good bones, and the shipyards does need to be mitigated, but it's our understanding that it would be less for a park than it would be for development as far as the cost of that. It hasn't been, you know, we've heard some numbers as to what it's going to take, but we also think that there would be some grants associated with it if it was going to be a park.
Thank you. M. Salas asked in reference to all the remediation in the parks and the development that's planned for, will there be any new parking lots in these locations?
Well, parking needs to be planned for. You know, and transportation, put it this way, transportation needs to be planned for. And parking is a piece of that. But it also needs to be thought through as to what else is around there. You know, we should be sharing parking. Parking should not be single use. And so that's a conversation that really comes when you know where the land, what the uses of the land are going to be. So then you can, you know, but the answer is yes, it has to be planned for. You know, there's already several parking garages in the stadium district that are losing money, and so my sense is that they're not utilized. And so there are some parking garages available, you know, but I would say that, you know, in some cities in Chicago, you know, the Grant Park there, they have parking underneath those parks. There's a huge parking garage underneath Grant Park. And in Cincinnati, there was a parking lot that's built underneath it. So there are some creative ways that you can address parking without having ugly parking garages.
Thank you. And last question, how much would it cost for a master plan for the series of Riverside Parks? And to follow up, and what 2 of the 3 firms would you suggest with helping to create that?
I don't think I mean, what we've seen in the other cities, there's a handful of firms that come up over and over again. Now, what's the right firm for us? I don't think we're ready to say that, but you know, there are a handful of firms that you know, Sasaki did the Chicago Riverwalk, and they've done I think they did the Cincinnati Park. But a lot of times it's a combination of firms. It's actually not really one firm. A lot of times there's more than one firm that do that. And as far as the cost goes, you know, it depends. Some of it depends on whether you're building, you have your defined land and you're going to build, you know, you're going to design a park, or are you looking at a holistic plan that is a higher level? And so you're looking at where should development be, where should parks be? That's an urban design, you know, it's a slightly different skill set. And so, you know, how much does it cost? I don't know. Probably $100,000 to $250,000 would be just a sense of that, you know, and we haven't priced it out. Oh, and I was just going to say, John Donahue has helped us in several conversations and has been a gracious host here. I just want to say thank you for being involved here. Keep the conversation going, and please, you know, stay informed and be active in advocating for this concept, you know, assuming you think it's a good idea. And so I'm going to turn it over to John Donahue here.
Nancy, thank you so much. I think as we can all see, we are in incredible hands, and the leadership of this group is exceptional. And Nancy, on behalf of the co-hosts, Nancy and Jimmy, thank you for walking us through the presentation. And much like I did, I think it's been maybe 2.5 months ago, occasionally I get an email or a text from Natalie Rosenberg, and I respond quickly because it means something, and this meant something. And I can't tell you, I mean, my reaction, and Natalie can affirm this, is it's a brilliant, brilliant idea. This is historic. As Jimmy said, this is generational, has the potential to be generational. And so the call to action is, as Sherry McGill said, contact our leaders with the Downtown Investment Authority, contact our city council persons, contact our mayor's office, and share with them your passion behind this idea. And so again, on behalf of the co-hosts, thank you, Nancy, for your leadership. Thank you for the collaborative effort that you're leading across all the nonprofits that are involved in this effort. And we are so excited to see what happens next. Thank you all and have a great evening.
All right.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara.